Hello, this is Al Judge. Welcome to another lesson from my book, From Photos to Art with Photoshop. In this video, we're going to talk about the selection tools, the marquee tools, particularly the rectangular and the elliptical marquee, the lasso tool and the magnetic lasso tool, and the quick selection tool and the magic wand. So we have 6 different selection tools, and we're going to talk about a number of different ways to use them. I'm going to start off with the elliptical marquee tool, and you may notice that I have my rollers here because I want to drag some guidelines here to use this tool. When you use the elliptical marquee, you don't start the ellipse from the center, you start it from a corner. So I'm just going to come in based on experience where I think might be a good spot to start my ellipse. And I'm going to choose that spot. And I'm going to drag it out and down. Okay, now when I have it about the right size, I still need to move it. I want to center it on this image. So that looks like a pretty good spot. What I want to do now is I want to go to Select, Inverse. And that means what's selected is outside the ellipse and inside the image. Before I use this, I need to either convert the background to a normal layer or duplicate the background layer. I'm going to duplicate it. Here we go, and I'll turn off the original background layer, and we'll be working with a copy. Now, since it's a copy, we can erase on here and get transparency. So I'm going to just hit the delete key now, and everything went away except what's inside that oval. So now I have a transparent background, and I'm going to come up here and I'm going to move my guidelines. Going to raise that up a bit. And what I want is about the same distance on the side from the ellipse as the top from the ellipse. I'm going to do select, deselect to get rid of those marquees. And I'll just point out, notice how this is a perfect geometric shape here. There's no doubt where the edges are, they don't need refinement. This is a key point when you're using the marquee tools. You get a very clear, clean cut selection. When we use the other tools, the lasso tools and the quick selection tool and the magic wand, we're going to get some very intricate shapes and not a simple geometric shape. For that reason, when we work with the marquee tools, it's often fine to place a selection on a new layer. Just create a layer from that selection because we need no refinement around the edge. When we work with some of these other tools, we're going to have to refine the edge, so it's best to be working on a layer with a layer mask. We'll be talking about layer mask in the next video. You'll see how that works. But for now, I moved these guidelines, and the reason I did is I want to create another ellipse that'll allow me to put a border around here. I'm going to come back and start up here at this peak, and I'm going to drag it out. And I can see I've pretty much got the distance I want. Now what I'd like to do is to move that. We're clipping down here. So I'd like to move this image up a bit. I want to move this image up a bit. I'm going to use my arrow keys on my keyboard. Oh. So that's more centered in the height, and now I'm going to move this position to reflect that change. So as you can see, at the narrowest point I got about a block and a half here and a block and a half here, so I've got a pretty much the same distance on the top as I have on the side. I'm going to hit the Marquee Tool again. I'm going to drag my marquee around that image, and I have a pretty decent border around it. I can, since marquee is active, I can use my arrow keys on my keyboard to fine tune its position, and that looks fairly decent. It's a little more on the width than we have on the height, but it's not terrible. I want to come back and I want to select this selection again with the marquee. So I want to move my guidelines down to touch that actual oval. I'm going to do that again. And what I want to do is I want to subtract from that. So I'm going to draw this marquee again. And this time the outer one will stay where it is. And I've got a pretty good selection around the original. So now I can fill in the area between these two ovals by coming to the paint bucket tool, and I'm going to restore my foreground background color to the default, so my foreground color is black. So if I use the paint bucket tool, I will fill in with black around that image. Deselect those selections. Okay, I want to add a little white trim around here, and the only way I can do that is I have to draw the outer ellipse first and then the inner one. So I'm going to move my guidelines, and I'm going to make the first ellipse, and it goes just roughly around the inner ellipse. And now I'm going to move my guidelines again on down so they just touch the original image. Okay, we have them touching the original image, and actually it's a little over here, but this will be fine. I'm going to fit screen so I can see the whole thing. Draw my inner ellipse. I have to say subtract from selection. I will start up here at the intersection, and I will draw an ellipse to cover that original image. I will release. I'm going to zoom in because this is very thin and I want to make sure I get it right. I'm going to flip the background and foreground color. So now my color in my paint bucket is white, and I will just click between these two lines. And now if I zoom or fit screen, you can see I have a white border. I'm going to deselect those marquees, and I'm going to come up here, view, clear guides. So now I have a nice oval shape. I can come in here and I can crop that some. Okay, I need to clear the cropping guides. Okay, but you can see I can crop that. And now I can mount that in an oval shaped frame. So basically, I just wanted to show you how you work with the marquee and specifically how you draw it, so that you have some control over it. You're not just guessing what you're doing. Let's create just a plain file, new file. I'm going to take the rectangular marquee and I'm just going to create a rectangle. I'm going to flip foreground and background color again. I'm going to grab my paint bucket and I'm going to just click in there. That will deselect the marquee. That will give me a nice backdrop for type or whatever I want to use it for. Then I can also come in here and I can change it to any color I want. Now the paint bucket contains this foreground color, and if I click on the black, it will change to that color. So we've covered the two marquee tools. Now we're going to take an image and we're going to select this pig using 4 different techniques with the Lasso tools, the Quick Selection tool. Okay, the first way we're going to select this pig is using the Quick Selection tool. I talked earlier about how it's an ideal tool for flowers because you have very clearly defined edges and smooth edges. That's somewhat true of this pig also, but you can see up here the background's not so clear, and places like this and along this pot it's not clearly defined, so it's not going to be as easy as the flower. The other reason is we have a lot of three-dimensional detail here with shadows and things that can look like an edge to Photoshop. So this is going to be a little more difficult, but still pretty easy selection. So the first technique I'm going to use, I'm going to start up at the tip of the ear and I'm going to use my Quick Selection tool and I'm just going to come down here and then I'm going to move it along and to the tip of the tail, and I'm going to release. And I see I missed a part up here, so I will drag that up. Okay, now problem I have is I have to come up here. This was my original selection. Now I need to add to the selection. So I'm going to come from this ear this time and grab down, and it will blend in with my existing selection. I might have to play with that a little more. Okay, when I start modifying selections like this, it's often beneficial to make the brush a little bigger, which I will do. And this time I can get most of it pretty easily. Okay, now I'm going to deselect some areas. This area in here doesn't belong on the pig, so I'm going to deselect that. Same here, the little area going to the pot. I'm going to clear that. Now we'll just zoom in and fine tune some of these things. I'm going to add a selection down here at that foot. But it'll be easier now if we zoom in to have a closer look. We'll go around the pig and see how we did. Okay, here's a place where we could use some refinement. So I want to add to selection, and I want to have a smaller brush. And I just want to brush along that edge, and it'll pick up the rest of it. And here's another area. I want to brush along there. And back in here, this is a little V trough where it's not part of the pig, so I'm going to subtract from that selection. Okay, it overshot. I'm going to go back. And it did a better job that time. Come over here, you can see I missed part of the ear. Oh, and I also have an area here that it picked up that it shouldn't have, so I'm going to subtract from that. Overshot again. The good thing is if you overshoot when you come back the next time, it usually does a pretty good job of getting the edge correct on the second try. So it looks like we have, it's a little difficult to tell in here, but it looks like, no, actually we do have just the ear there. That background is very, not as clearly defined as we would like, but see it's separate. And I'm just going to click here to refine that ear tip. And I'm going to come along, and I'm going to paint along the edge of this ear to add that in. And again, I'm going to have to go back to the subtract to clean that up. And it looks like we're going to have to use the add to selection one more time. I'm just going to put it there on the edge and click. And it's starting to pick it up. Okay, here's a little something down here we missed. I have to get rid of that. Oh, actually it should be add to selection. Okay, and on his nose we have a little bit that we missed. We picked that up by just putting the cursor there and clicking, and add overshot. Okay. We come down here, we got a pretty good line there alongside the pot. Now we need to fix this. We had something we shouldn't have. We need to add a little more of the foot. And a little bit trim. And we need to add this area to the selection. Come across the bottom. We've got a fairly good selection, but we missed a little bit here. You can come along that edge and get the rest of the foot. And we have a shadow here that should not be part of the selection. We're just going to brush along that edge and let it refine that edge. Again, it overshot it by a little bit, so we're going to come back right along that edge again, and hopefully this time it'll get it right. Not quite yet. Okay, we're getting pretty close now. And I'm going to leave that. Well, here we got a little tip here we can get rid of. And in here. And we have a little area here that we need to clean up. Come right down that hoof. Overshot. We're going to clean that up. I'm going to come on this edge here. Refine that. And refine this. Add that little tip here. Okay. We come up to pig's back. It's a pretty clean selection. I'm going to check the tip of the tail. We did pretty well there. So I'm going to Say that's okay. And we come up here. And now I'm going to zoom out, use fit screen. And I want to save this. We could save it on just as a selection on a new layer. Oh, we got a spot here. Let's go back and pick that up. Subtract. But I'm going to refine edge. And when I do that, we have a red overlay everywhere except the selection. And it's showing pretty good outline. But we're going to save this on a new layer with layer mask. I'm going to say OK. And you can see we have, now we have a transparent background and a pretty good selection. So I'm going to back up here, go back to the original image, and I'm going to select it with the Lasso Tool. Now I can take the Lasso Tool and I can come along this edge as well as I think I can. I'm not going to spend too much time, but I'm going to try and stay along that edge. And here. So what we're doing is we're helping Photoshop to find the edges by telling them approximately where they are. And down here, here, same thing here. Come up here, come along this pot. So I'm tracing the outline of this pig. And I'm back to my starting point. And you can see we have a marquee around it now. And I'm going to do refine edge again. And we have our red overlay. Here we can see a couple places where it's not quite right. So I'm going to come in here and grab this edge tool, refine radius tool. And what I want to do is this is another paint tool, brush tool. I want to come along the edges with this brush, and when I do, you'll see the red overlay disappears where I'm painting. And now when I release, it will fill back in. Didn't do a perfect job. It didn't get that edge perfect this time. Same thing here. We'll clean that up and hopefully it'll fill in. It does pretty well. It did, a fair job. Here again on the back it should have gotten it perfect and it didn't. And we're going to do a little bit around that ear. Okay, now we can refine this some. We can do what's called a smart radius, and we can move this out a bit and see if it cleans that up a bit, because it's gonna look for these hard edges. And if it were an object that had soft edges as well, it would be able to distinguish between the two. I'm going to go back and click this tool again and just paint up here at this ear. It actually made it a little worse. Another thing I can do is shift the edge a bit. See if that works for me. And that does seem to be helping a bit. And again, I'm going to place this on a layer with layer mask. Now the advantage here is that we can come in and clean up these areas that aren't quite perfect on our layer mask, which is here. You can see the general outline of the pig is white against black. Black conceals, white reveals. And we missed a little here, so we can, when we get to our layer mask, we can come in here and we can clean that up a bit. Now we're going to do this another way. I'm going to take my history back, original image. This time I'm going to use the lasso tool again, but I'm going to lasso it a lot faster. I'm going to come in, I'm going to stay outside the pig, and I'm just going to do very rough outline. Come around it. It's a very rapid way to do this selection. I'm up here. And there we go. It took much less time to do that lasso. And when we go to refine edge, hopefully we can get a little closer by using this edge tool. So I'm going to paint up here. And you can see it moving in some. And down along this ear, and along the snout, all through here. Okay. So I could continue painting, but I'm going to place this on a layer with layer mask again. And you can see it's not as clean as the last one, but I can clean this up with my layer mask, and it won't take that much longer than the other image. So it's much faster to lasso it. It will take a little longer to clean up, but overall it will probably be faster with this technique. This time I'm going to use the magnetic lasso tool. Now with the magnetic lasso tool, I want to stay close to the edge, but I don't really have to be right on the edge. And what's going to happen is it's going to snap to the edges just like a magnet would snap to steel. And it's going to put little squares all along the edge so you can see where it's snapping. I'm going to start right here because it's a very visible point. One of the idiosyncrasy to this tool is that you cannot close the lasso unless you come back to the exact starting point. So I have to place my starting point somewhere where I can easily find it. So I'm going to do it right here in this crevice. And I'm going to start coming down the pig's back. And you can see it depositing all those little squares as I move along the back. I don't have to be real precise with my positioning. I can be a little outside or a little inside. And it'll just keep placing those squares. Come around the tail. Come down here around the feet. And just go around these edges. As you can see, it's just snapping right to it. Come up around the ear. And I'm back to my starting point, so I'm going to release. And you can see I have a really fine selection. I'm going to use Refine Edge again. And you can see it's pretty good except for this tip on the ear, which was my fault. I didn't go slowly enough around that ear. And there was one other place where I messed up down here when my hand slipped and I got a different point. But you can see it's a pretty good selection. We're going to go to New Layer with Layer Mask. And there again, as we look around, it's pretty good. We'll be able to clean this ear up and this little area very easily when we go to the layer mask and work on that. So there we've done 4 different techniques to select the same object, and we got slightly different results. As you begin using these different tools, you'll discover which one you prefer for each of these. When I did this myself without any narration, it took me about 3 minutes to do the selection and clean it up to layer mask with the first 3 techniques, and it took about 90 seconds with this magnetic lasso tool. So the magnetic lasso tool was about twice as fast as the other methods. And so this is an example of a selection where the magnetic lasso tool makes sense. Again, if I was doing a flower, I would definitely use the quick selection tool. It's much faster for that application. So again, as you gain experience, you'll learn which of these tools is best for whatever you're doing. Okay, we're going to go to a different image. I'm going to let the pig go. So now I have a landscape image. Sometimes in a landscape it's very beneficial to separate the sky from the land, the details. Now this particular image, there's no reason to do that, but I chose it because it has a couple features that I like. It has this tree detail over here without leaves, where you can see the blue sky through the branches. And this is very difficult to select. And there's also some in here, a little there. So it has this detail that's difficult to select, and that's why I've chosen this particular landscape image, even though I don't really need to separate the sky from the land. I'm going to do it here. And I'm going to use the quick selection tool. I'm going to start in this corner, and I'm just going to go toward those trees. You can see it did a pretty good job, except it grabbed all the trees that I didn't particularly want in my selection. So I'm going to come back and refine the selection with subtract from selection. I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to just bring that back. So the selection doesn't include all these little branches. And you can see, even though I did better, it's not perfect, but I'm going to use the Refine Edge tool again. And I'm going to brush over that area. I'm going to make my brush a little larger. I'm going to brush over that area and see what I get. Maybe I'll get some refinement here. So you can see I picked up some of those branches. also come over here and go on these edges and refine that some. So this time I'm just going to create a layer mask. And you can see that the land and everything is now transparent, and the sky is what I have still showing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to reverse that. So I'm going to come over to the layer mask and I'm going to double click, and I'm going to come in here and choose invert. And now I have a selection that is basically the ground and the trees, but there is a fair amount of blue sky in here. So I'm going to get to use my last selection tool to demonstrate here. I'm going to zoom in an area. I'm going to pick this area here, and I'm going to take the magic wand tool. Now the magic wand is going to select a color, and I want it to select this blue sky for the entire image. So I'm going to uncheck contiguous. If I had that checked and I clicked in here, it would just do a little area, and I'd have to go to another little area. The little area is everywhere. But in this case, it's not contiguous, so it will do this color in the entire image. And I want to make the tolerance pretty high. I'm going to go to 70. And the reason is there's no blue anywhere else in the image except the sky. So I want to make sure I get it all. Okay, I need to make sure I'm working on my image and not my layer mask. So I click this so you can see whichever one is active will have little brackets around it. So right now the layer mask is active. I'm going to switch to the image and make that active so it has little brackets around it. And I'm going to come and zoom in here. I'm going to grab my magic wand, and I've got the tolerance set fairly high to 50. It's not contiguous, and I'm going to click in here. See, I'm going to blow that up just a little more because I want to make sure I get nothing but the blue. Grab my magic wand, and I'm going to come in here and click. And you can see it's made a very involved selection, picking up all these little spots between the tree branches. And I'm just going to hit my delete key, and all that is cleared. I'll now go select, deselect, and when I go fit screen, you can see I have a very nice selection that's showing the land and the trees and the branches, but no sky. So now if I wanted to, I could come and put in a different sky, maybe one with clouds, whatever I want. But I have this selection without the sky, and that can be very beneficial in landscape photography. Okay, we've made some pretty interesting selections here in this video. I hope you found it interesting and that you learned something here. I'll see you in the next lesson.